Now, this video is going to be a little bit more unusual, and yes, welcome back to the channel, thank you for watching. This is going to be an audio-only reading of short scary stories in celebration of Halloween, you guessed it. So, enjoy. I will be crediting all the Redditors who have posted their short scary stories, so please give them the love and, yeah, just enjoy. Thanks. The title. My girlfriend told me I'm not her type, and I've never been so relieved. My mom's childhood bestie, Sharon, popped into the clinic while I was there giving blood. "Is that Ryan? Look how big he's getting," she said. Mom pointed at the tube in my arm, boasting about how I was a universal donor, the only interesting thing about me. Then, she invited Sharon over for dinner. Later, when I answered the door, I froze, because Sharon brought her daughter, Ashley. Ashley had curly dark hair and pretty brown eyes. I was too nervous to speak until Mom shouted, "Don't just stand there, invite them in already." While we ate, Mom said Ashley should let me show her around town since she was new here. "I'd like that," she said, scraping all the peppers and garlic and onion off her chicken cutlets. In coastal towns, gossiping is a national sport, so I knew she'd figure out what a giant loser I was eventually. A rumor circulated at school that a pale babe with a fat ass moved here, but luckily for me, she turned out to be harder to spot around town than Bigfoot. I mostly took Ashley on late night walks so there'd be less danger of us being noticed. She didn't speak much, but I knew she listened because she asked meaningful questions. After a few weeks, I mustered up the courage to take her to the most romantic spot I could think of. The beach. Swallowing a lump, I laced my hand with hers and then we faced each other. We leaned into each other slowly, and just before our lips connected, I heard a voice. It was my bully, Johnny Patterson. He came rushing towards us yelling insults the entire time. Quickly, I confessed to Ashley I was social poison, that she might still have been able to salvage her reputation by saying we didn't know each other. She laughed and said she liked me too much to do that. Filled with courage, I squared up to Johnny, who caught me with a knee to the groin. From the sand, I watched him throw an arm over Ashley's shoulder, telling her she was too hot to hang out with a loser like me. The corners of Ashley's mouth curled up, revealing two huge fangs. Before Johnny could react, those sharp teeth clamped shut around his throat, and within seconds, his body got drained of every nutritious element. Ashley tossed his withered husk into the water and then looked down at me, her face beautiful despite all the blood. She told me I didn't need to be afraid because I wasn't her type. Specifically, her blood type. According to her, O negative, universal donor, tasted like sun-baked mayonnaise studded with cheese and diarrhea. She said she wanted us to be boyfriend-girlfriend, but would understand if I said no, and that she'd give me time to think about it. So I'm still sitting here at the beach, confused, terrified, and weirdly excited. And now I need help figuring out what to do next. Now that's a fun one. That's a fun little cheeky one. I think that's not too scary for anyone. I think you can let a kid listen to that one. I think you'll be okay. Depends on your kid. Alright, next story. Now this story is posted by user Mr. Skulk. And again, this was posted on Reddit Short Scary Stories. We went to a funeral. I walked up to the funeral home, trailing D by a few steps as I fumbled with my suit jacket and cuffs. I asked her to help with the buttons, but she kept walking, trying to compose herself. She fixed a wrinkle on her skirt. We were greeted by two employees. I gave them our names, and the shorter one looked us up in the registry. After twisting up her face and giving me a weird look, she eventually found what she needed. She pointed out the bathrooms and led us to the visitation. A glistening closed casket stood alone in the corner of the room, flanked on both sides by a mountain of flowers. The picture frame on top didn't show the deceased, just a set of hydrangeas. Dee loves hydrangeas. It must be tough to enjoy things you like when you're at a funeral. Dee and I were shocked when we heard the diagnosis. Aggressive, rare, fast. Poor woman was gone within weeks. The shock broke her husband. He'd go catatonic for hours and scream every time he remembered she was gone. He would regularly be found walking outside at 3 a.m., enjoying the sunshine. Sometimes he talked into the air. I suppose he needed some coping mechanisms, and detachment from reality was the best he could do. We all react differently. As we paid our respects, I couldn't help looking at the messages on the flower arrangements. I spotted a generic message and whispered to Dee how they could have at least put in a few seconds of effort for final goodbyes. I greeted the sad yet composed family. I wondered whether they had accepted the finality of the situation. I looked around and realized I recognized nearly everyone there. It's remarkable how much friends can overlap, especially in a small community. We exchanged how are yous as we waited. As the visitation drew to a close, everyone shuffled into the chapel for the ceremony. The casket stood prominently, the same hydrangeas adorning the picture frame on top. Dee and I sat at the back and got a few stares from the others, who were spread out through the pews. The front row was empty. People can be so childish sometimes. It was a fairly quick affair, full of prayers for the deceased and forgiveness from a higher power. As the priest went about his business, he motioned for her husband, Paul, to say a few words. Except the poor man's name is Chris. My name is Paul. I looked over to Dee, half chuckling at the mistake. She wasn't there anymore. And the crowd was now looking at me. I looked at the picture of the smiling face above the casket and screamed. That's nice. That's a little Shyamalan in there, if you guys like that. Always a good way to, squeeze in a twist, especially within a 500-word limit. FYI, the subreddit likes to keep the short stories under 500 words, and I think that's awesome. I really like it when there are constraints. It kind of makes limitations around what you have to do, and you have to get a little bit more creative, and I always like stories like that, so I really appreciate this one. And last but not least, this next story. This story is titled Soup. As an only child born to a pair of only children, I became accustomed to solitude. Solitude and silence easily became my two friends, though somehow I grew lonely. This is when I met my husband Harold. Harold was a kind man of good virtue and a strong heart. He wove his way into my soul and broke apart my solitary, sedimentary life. I never minded his boisterous laughter or the way he clomped about the home in his work boots. I never complained when his snores woke me in the night or when he sang to the birds beyond our heads. My life was everything I could have wanted until my stomach began to grow. Twins. Two adorable, babbling baby boys. Harold was over the moon with joy, and I thought I was too. Then they cried. No, they wailed. They wailed and wailed and wailed until I believe my ears bled. The smallest thing would make them scream. I couldn't even hold them before they burst into tears and cries. The doctor simply applauded us for having babies with such strong lungs. Harold would hold them and the screaming would stop. What was it about his touch that made them settle when mine could only cause fuss? Thoughts of this and more rolled and rattled in my brain as they cried. Of course, Harold thought nothing of it as he would leave each day to work. He would leave me with these monsters. Horrid, a thought to imagine your children as monsters. I couldn't see them as anything more. Their screams would pierce my dreams even if they were silent. When my belly began to swell again, the terror that flowed through brought me to my knees. The imagination of more babies screaming and young ones running all around me filled my heart with horror. I knew what I had to do. Harold never noticed the inordinate amount of potatoes or small can of rat poison I had in our small kitchen. He never considered the color of the baby's bottles. He never even complained about the taste of the soup I served for dinner that night. It wasn't until the babies began puking that he even realized anything was amiss. I could not mirror the fear in his eyes as he watched our sons choke, for I was not afraid. Soon, he collapsed to the ground in a heap of convulsing pain. I watched as the loving man's eyes hardened when I stood over him, asking such a simple question, why? I bent over his twitching frame and spoke so softly, I wondered if he could hear me. This is all your fault. You did this to me. I jabbed a finger against my slightly bulged stomach. His breathing hitched and died away with a soft hiss. Finally. Silence. The blissful sound I had missed so much wrapped around me, comforting my soul. A small victory because there was one last task. I walked calmly back to my side of the table and sat. Without much ceremony, I tipped the bowl of soup into my waiting mouth and drank. Well, happy Halloween, guys. Ending on a dark note there, but I hope you appreciated this reading. As always, you can choose to subscribe or not. This was kind of a quick, fun one. Also, I want to credit the user. It is user Lost Canoe. So give roses to this user who submitted the story to Reddit Short Scary Stories. I really enjoyed doing this. I mean, if you want someone who is consistent and great at telling scary stories and actually gets real encounters from real people and reads those stories on her channel, you should go check out Beyond Belleza. She has a great channel over there. I do have it on my YouTube channel. If you look under my channels, I've said channel way too many times, but if you look at channels, you should see her account there. So yeah, please go check that out. Happy Halloween, everyone. Appreciate it. And as always, I will see you later.